The pensions for both Jacksons. They were public employees. His work for the federal government since being elected to Congress in 1995. Her work for the city of Chicago since being elected alderman in 2007. Ex-Congressman Jackson is eligible to receive $8,700 per month in disability pay due to his bipolar condition and could receive a partial federal pension of $45,000 per year once he is eligible. While on the city council, Sandy Jackson had automatic pension contributions of more than $50,000 withdrawn from her pay, even though she chose not to be a member of the city pension fund. Her contributions of $51,279 and change are her property and could be withdrawn at any time.
All right, folks, welcome back to the Steve Malzberg Show. That report from WLS, the ABC 7i team, investigating the fact that Jesse Jackson Jr., who's going to jail, and his wife, who might have eventually wind up in jail a little later, especially Jesse Jackson Jr., though, going to get a lot of money, and you and I are going to keep paying him. Joining us now to talk about a whole host of things is the chief congressional correspondent for the Washington Examiner, Susan Ferrechio. Hello, Susan.
Hey, Steve. Thanks for having me on the show.
It's always my pleasure. All right, so, I mean, this Jesse Jackson thing, I mean, to me, as a skeptic, as a cynic, how convenient that, while all this was going on, it was discovered he had bipolar disease or whatever it's called and spent time in rehab for it. And now because of it, he'll be eligible to get $8,700 a month, probably for the rest of his life.
Well, it's really interesting because I've noticed over the years that when lawmakers get in trouble, they very frequently claim an outlying factor. For instance, a lot of them will say alcoholism or drugs played a role in influencing their behavior. And now in this case, we have mental illness perhaps influencing why he spent the campaign money on personal items. It's a great card if you can play it. It sort of lends to the atmosphere that our elected officials get the kind of treatment that an ordinary person who breaks the law wouldn't get. And I think that sort of reflects an overlying sentiment and the public has right now. If you look at this health care law, there's a big story out about how members of Congress and their staff will be exempt from some of the more painful aspects of the implementation of the law. Well, the rest of us will have to be under it full force. So there's always these exceptions for our elected officials. And I think the public is really getting kind of fed up with it. But the question is, is there anything that can be done? Well, because they're the ones in power, they make the rules. And you see that, I do up in Congress because I watch how they make the rules. When they were crafting this bill for the Affordable Care Act, the staff specifically excluded themselves from it. There are a lot of people who found that really outrageous, and that's why someone like Senator Grassley tried to reimpose the law on the staff members, but then now they've got the exception, helped by President Obama, so that they don't have to worry about losing their premium support.
Right, he got personally involved, Obama, I think.
Yeah, and other people there's a fear that if they don't get their
people would leave,
people would leave, and to be fair, the Kaiser Foundation did a study, and in private companies, most people get a good portion of their, when you get health insurance through your employer, they pay the lion's share of that. And so that's what the staffers were saying, is that we're on par with what the private sector was getting anyway, and now we wouldn't be. Now we would lose that, and so there'd be a big brain drain because everybody would just go work either other areas of the federal government or whatnot,
right,
to get that money back. And so, you have this whole atmosphere, here's an exception because you're in Congress, or here's an exception because you're, a member of, but he is going, 30 months. It's not like he's going off on probation or to a halfway house. He's going to have to serve real time for this. And so is his wife, and they have children. So it's pretty serious. He's serving the kind of time that I think there's some other lawmakers did for even more serious corruption. So in some ways, I don't feel like he really got off easy. But this whole thing with the mental illness coming in and how that's going to benefit him
Right. Yeah.
He's also a good lawyer.
I guess.
Jesse Jackson Jr. and his dad is Jesse Jackson.
And he's got a good doctor, I guess, too. Okay, we're talking to Susan Ferrechio here on the Steve Malzberg Show. How surprised were you? I just talked to Rick Santorum about this right before you. That Newt Gingrich yesterday up in Boston at the RNC said that Republicans or the GOP has zero ideas for health care. And Santorum himself said, wait a minute, said if he's still a Republican, I mean, he's had a group that has put forth many ideas on health care. So if he's still a Republican, that's at least one idea on health care. But, the House, I mean, there are people there. They've passed bills. They've passed alternatives in the House. So how could Newt say that? What's he trying to do?
Well, he's a big thinker. And when you compare what the kind of low murmurs of what the Republicans have tried to put there for health care compared to this big, massive thing that the Democrats passed, I guess maybe it pales in comparison. But the fact is that's what the public would prefer. That irony of what Newt Gingrich said was that he said there's no big ideas out there for health care. Well, guess what? I don't think the public, if you look at the poll numbers anyway, wanted a really big thing that we ended up getting. So, there's a disconnect even between what he's saying and what the public wants. When Republicans talk about reforming health care, they talk about smaller elements of it, which I actually think when you look at what people prefer, it matches more with what the public is looking for. For instance, more access to health care for pre-existing conditions. Not excluding people for various reasons.
Right. They should make a one sheet. The Republicans should make a one sheet with all the, donut hole, no pre-existing conditions. You want to keep your kids on your plan, that kind of stuff, and just say this is our plan.
I know, and I think it kind of gets drowned out, and part of it is that the media preference is to ignore it.
Well, absolutely, yeah.
But and it is because Republicans actually, I don't believe, agree on a lot of this stuff right now on really the way forward. And there's sort of a lack of a big, bold leader in the Republican leadership who can get out there and talk about what alternatives would be. I mean, who really is the spokesperson for the Republicans right now? Is it Reince Priebus? No. Who is it? Is it John Boehner? Certainly not. Is it Rush Limbaugh? Who knows who it is out there? If they had that person, maybe they could push forward big, bold ideas, but they don't.
Well,
and when Mitt Romney was a de facto head, but back when he was the nominee, you didn't hear him talking about alternatives. You heard him talking about repeal.
No, I got to tell you, Priebus had the best comment. He's the only one that I have heard say on the Republican side, and he said it on one of the shows on Sunday, I think to Candy Crowley. He said, wait a minute, why would we be shutting down the government? If the Republicans could unite and decide to defund, keep the Obamacare out of the budget, and the Democrats and the president decide not to accept that and the government shuts down, why are we shutting down the government? And that's what Republicans should go around and say.
Mm-hmm. They do. They have said that, but it gets ignored. And I think because the president has got the pulpit and he's really good at, with these head-to-head crises, getting out there. He plays it so well. It's almost like old hand to him, and he yawns his way through. He gets in front up to the podium and says, "Well, they're doing it again. They're
right.
holding it." And people, there's a control of the message, and the Democrats have the control. Republicans are always a little bit too shy about the whole thing, in my opinion. They're not bold enough in pushing what their view is forward. I mean, I think that would help their cause because the Democrats usually win these things despite the logic that you just pointed out and Reince Priebus pointed out. There's not a lot. It gets drowned out.
Absolutely. Well, the media, who they're going to blame and what their coverage is, and then that's one reason why. We're talking to the chief congressional correspondent for the Washington Examiner, Susan Ferrechio, here on the Steve Malzberg Show. All right, let's move to immigration reform. And your colleague at the Examiner, Byron York, told me earlier in this week that he believes, and he's reflecting the concerns of many, and I wonder if you agree with this, that immigration is going to pass in the House, however it passes, because the focus as the Congress is home and the town meetings take place and the people talk, most Republicans, most conservatives feel immigration reform is dead, that the House isn't going to do it. That's the impression they have. So they're focusing on health care. and not talking about immigration reform. So the Republicans are going to come back, and the leadership and everybody's going to say, well, how many people actually talked to you about immigration reform? How many objected? And it's going to be, well, virtually none. Well, then let's just do it. And that's one thing he thinks might happen because of the focus on health care. Do you agree?
Well, I think there's two schools of thought on immigration right now. There's some people who think, no, it's not going to happen, and for a variety of reasons, how part of which will be consumed by more pressing issues, which involve the government funding and the debt limit. That will consume them to the point where they simply cannot take on a third massive divisive issue. And Congress can only handle. They really, truly cannot juggle many things up there if they're all, very politically treacherous. They can usually only handle one big politically treacherous thing at a time, and already they've got a couple that they have to deal with. Okay, so that's one reason why immigration may not happen. And then you get the time element combined with that. You run out of time very quickly in the fall because of the various recesses, and also because the year runs out and we come back and it's election time again. We're talking 2014 elections, and then it becomes very hard to pass something like immigration reform in an election year. So in that sense, it just may not happen. It just may not happen for that reason. But there are others who think, Boehner's thinking about his legacy. What has he accomplished? You had Medicare Part D for Hastert. You had health care law for Nancy Pelosi. Will he want to try to push something big through and then say sayonara? Try to, not so much a kamikaze dive, but a swan song. that would say, because if he does push through a comprehensive plan, his chances of becoming speaker again, of course, diminish. So that's the other alternative. They would really be ambushing a lot of the conference by saying we're going to do immigration reform in the form of something like what the Senate bill is, because there's a lot of guys there that really don't like that, despite the fact that there's a lot of pressure coming from big corporations and the mainstream Republicans, a lot of the donors who really want immigration reform. So there's these two dueling elements.
Then you have Marco Rubio, who basically says, well, the president has done this before. He did it when the DREAM Act didn't go through in 2012, and he then decided who he was going to deport and who he was not going to deport, so by executive order or by deciding which part of the law to enforce and not enforce. So he says if we don't do immigration reform comprehensively, the president will just issue kind of like a blanket pardon of all the illegals here or grant them citizenship by executive order. And I'm saying, so you're gonna run your policy making around the fact that we have a president who is willing to do things of this magnitude on his own and circumvent the Congress? So you're going to capitulate to avoid that? You're going to give it to him rather than make him do it? I mean, I think that's a dangerous thought process.
Mm-hmm. Well, I personally think what Rubio will do has mostly to do with his own political future and less than what the best policy is. I think what he is hoping at this point, just given the backlash I think that he's experienced, I think
he needs cover, right? He needs cover.
I think Rubio would like to see this thing go away at this point because he's really in a tough spot, and it doesn't really look the way he wanted it to look. It's far broader and more liberal of a piece of legislation than he was really comfortable with. He wanted the piecemeal approach. He wanted more stronger border security. So, I frankly think if it went away, Rubio wouldn't be all that upset because it's not. I don't think it's going to help him with the base. People are really furious with Rubio over this, particularly in his own state.
Yeah,
it's really a dangerous.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. All right, Susan, we appreciate it. We'll speak to you next week. Thank you.
Okay, Steve. Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.